and we're going to go over to this idea of dynamics. So those things aren't standalone. Each one of those impacts the other in a certain way. And I want you to think about it. And we're going to post in here into the dynamics discussion. And so think about, if you have to have really narrow focus, how does that impact pace and energy? If you have to have broad focus, how does it impact pace and energy? If you have to have a very deliberate pace, what does that do around focus and energy? If you know that you're going to be expending a lot of energy, how does that impact the other parts? So for instance, I'll give you an example, and then I'm going to turn you guys loose, put Post-its up about the dynamics of these areas. So for instance, if I have to have intense focus, our brains use a lot of energy when you have to focus. And you know this, if you've had a day of focused at your computer getting stuff done, you still walk away tired because there's a lot of energy that goes into focus. So if I know that I've got to focus on something, I've got to slow down. So I've got to have a very deliberate pace. And I know that I'm going to be expending energy. So what other ways, and I'd like you go ahead and write things down, or you can speak it. How do they relate to each other? How are the dynamics between these things? And I want to hear from you guys. How are they related? You can post it, you can say it any way you want.
I don't even know how to write this, or maybe even just start explaining how this is working in my head. But I'm like transitioning careers, coming from federal work to like more independent practice and stuff like that. And so for me, I'm so used to like maxing out all of these all the time. So it's like in my cup, I've poured it out completely by half of the day. And then by the end of the day, I'm just like, I have to focus on a lot of stuff and I need the energy, but it's taxed because it's gone from, so the idea that they all feed into each other. I mean, it makes a lot of sense that, why I feel the way I feel now, because I'm trying to unlearn a lot of those things. But I mean, I don't have any grand ideas around it, but just,
and that's getting into some bonus material here. Yeah. And you guys feel free to ignore me as I talk, but, and put stuff down. But what you just described is why people get burned out and leave, because managers and leaders have the expectation that you can have them all up on 11 all the time. And so you get this, that was the big revolt. As soon as employees could figure they could hop the great, it's not the great resignation, it was the great reshuffle. Because people were leaving to find places that would treat them better, that wouldn't have the expectation of all 11 all the time. And that's coming back, and that it's not going to be as much of the employees market as it was, but managers need to realize this dynamic so that people can recharge, and then they can have high energy and all that kind of stuff. And employees can't expect their organization to take care of them. And this is a skill set that if you can bring to a workplace, you're going to have that long-term impact that you want to have. You're going to be able to keep it at, get the right thing at the right time and meet those expectations when they're needed, but also not like you can push back at your boss. Okay, you're giving me 10 things and now you just gave me 12 more. Which ones do I replace? Because there's only so much. And the self-awareness, and then be able to manage yourself and negotiate those tasks with your work. So what else? How do they impact? How does pace impact focus and energy?
What's going through my head, John, is like one thing that I've always just wondered if it was me weird or if it's everybody, but like I like to listen to podcasts and books when I'm doing other things, including shopping. But if I've got a list and I don't know where the beans are and I've got to find them, I have to turn my podcast off because I can't focus to find what I need to find. Whereas if I'm just getting the milk or whatever, I know where it's at, I don't. And so I think of that in the normal course of my workday. Probably the same thing is true, where there are things that require my focus to go up, and I don't think about dialing the pace back and taking out distractions or other things. And so I'm certain I'm not as effective as I would be if I would be conscious of those dials.
Yeah. You know that silly thing about when like you are looking for a sign when you're driving and you turn off the music? That is focus. You realize that there's a lot of things that are vying for your attention. And in order to find the right thing, you need to turn it down. You can't have that broad. When you're just cruising along, like I do this all the time. I'll have a podcast in my ear when I'm just sorting through I'm not answering email, but I'm going through and like deleting all the junk and getting it in the right place. I'll have the podcast on, but as soon as I need to respond to somebody, at least if I'm serious about the response, I have to turn it off. So I think it's really important in this mind shift that we're talking about, understanding how these are related. And this creates this awareness. If I'm aware, for instance, I'm going to have those 2 gnarly weeks that are going to be really costly with energy and really, really fast pace. I need to do my focus before I leave for those events. Because I know once I get there, I'm not going to be able to do the intense mind thinking and planning that I would need to do. So I'm doing all that before I leave, and I'm writing it down so that when I'm in the midst of the craziness, I have it written down. I did my deep thinking about it first. Now, when it's high energy and it's fast paced, it frees me up to actually problem solve, because all that's been taken care of, and now I can respond to whatever comes at me. So I think of it as when you have to have sharp focus, you have to slow down, and you know it's going to expend energy. When you have broad focus, you can speed up the pace, and you can also conserve energy. When you know you're stepping into a fast-paced situation, know that you're not going to be able to focus, have that sharp focus. And but when you're slowing down, you can increase you can broaden you can sharpen your focus, and you can conserve energy. So that awareness piece of knowing and foreseeing where you're going to go with that. Does that make sense? As you capture your thoughts, I'll just summarizing these things. When you need to find focus and clarity, you need to slow down, and you need to expend energy to do it. Don't try and do it when you're tired. If you need to increase pace, I'm going with the typical things that we're asked to do. If you need to increase pace, understand that you need to focus, you do low focus items, and then you need to tap into energy stores, because it's going to cost you energy. And if you need to increase energy, you need to work on low focus items and slow down. And though typically we are told to need to be 11 at pace, 11 at focus, and 11 at energy, and you can't. So you need to know how to balance or how to work those things out. And I use the word balance, but what I really mean is positive dynamic tension. When you think about tension, you pull on a string, if it's equal forces in every direction, it goes nowhere. And so that is balance. Balance means that the tension is equal and you go nowhere. When you talk about positive dynamic tension, what you're doing is you're intentionally going in one direction or another, putting emphasis on one direction or another, so that you pull harder on one string and it goes in that direction. So instead of talking about balance, which is static, let's talk about positive dynamic tension, which gets you moving in the right direction and choosing which string you pull so you go in the right direction.